Hi, my name is Joe. I just finished building a Curtiss P-40 Warhawk model, and I figured I would talk about it, give my thoughts on the build, and also show the final thing I got. So here's the kit here. It's AIRFIX 1/48 scale. The box art's really cool. It depicts Pearl Harbor being bombed by the Japanese in 1941. I have to admit that I was kind of tempted to build this one because I don't see this one very often. I always thought that the roundel with the red dots, very sharp, very patriotic, I guess. And I think it's a very cool kit. I'm tempted to maybe sometime down the line build it like this. I've seen a few videos online of people building this version. I think it looks really sharp. However, I decided to go with the Flying Tiger version because I've seen this plane a couple times in some museums growing up, and I've always liked it. My dad really likes it too, and I kind of asked him which one I should go with, and I can't say no to what my dad wanted, and he really wanted me to build this one, so that's what I went with here. Again, box art's really cool. I really like the AIRFIX box art, especially on the newer kits. I don't know if they're necessarily newer, but just the newer box art. I mean, you could put this in an air museum, and you know, you could put that right up on the wall there, and it would fit right in. And took my flying hour off here. I haven't joined the club or even know if it, you know, is going or whatever, but I'm gonna look into that. I've seen people saving them up and stuff, so I got that part out of there. Got this kit for $30 at Hobby Lobby. I used a 40% off coupon, which is a coupon they seem to have an expiration date on, but they always seem to have it no matter what week it is. So out the door, you know, probably about 20 bucks is what I paid for it. I think it's pretty good value. $20 for a pretty good kit. And let's take a look at the instructions here. So the instructions here are pretty standard. I do like the AIRFIX instructions that they are in color. A lot of kits that are maybe, you know, not quite so expensive have the black and white instructions, which are fine, but I do like the color. You know, the red really pops. And you know, you just got a little bit of history here about the airplane. It's always good to read up on that. Typically when I do a new model build, I'll watch one or two documentaries on the subject matter. I'm really interested in history, and you know, it kind of gets me in the mindset of, you know, what the pilots went through, the history behind the aircraft, gives me some ideas about weathering and that type of thing. So I definitely recommend learning about the subject matter that you're doing. It makes me a lot more interested to do it. You should always do something that you're interested in, and also when you display your piece, when you're done, you can know some facts about it to, you know, show off to your friends and that type of thing. So so you just got some specifications here on the real aircraft, and you know, you can take a look at that if you want. Here you just got some icon instructions and some basic general information on how to assemble the kit. If you're a first-time model builder, this can come quite in handy, as each manufacturer has different icons and different sets of instructions. So it's good to at least familiarize yourself with it. I'm no expert at model building, but you know, I know the gist of it, I would like to think. So, you know, and there are times when I'll be building something, I'm like, what does that mean, and that type of thing, and you know, I'll go back to this. So okay, the AIRFIX instructions are, I feel, very well laid out. I do like that they're color coded to show you, you know, the parts that may have been done on the previous step, and kind of understand what you're doing here. First step here is just building the cockpit, and you know, this is pretty self-explanatory. You just cut off the pieces as indicated. The numbers indicate the Humbrol colors to the model kit. So again, each manufacturer has a different, you know, paint guide. Tamiya has their own. AIRFIX uses Humbrol. There's Revell. So this can be a little bit confusing. I also recommend that going through this, finding out what colors you need so that you don't get tripped up as you're going is always a good idea. So I just kind of look at it, and typically the cockpits are, you know, that interior green with, you know, flat black and, you know, leather for the seat cushion, stuff like that. So it's good, you know, if I'm going to do this cockpit in a night, then, you know, let me find out what colors they are, let me go over them and figure out if I have everything. So that's always a good idea. I think it's always a good idea to go through the whole booklet, actually, just to get an idea of what the steps are, and not even so much following it, you know, step by step, but maybe understanding, well, I'm going to paint it, so maybe it's not a good idea to do the wheels when it says, just to give yourself an idea. So I like to take a look at the book in the beginning. So anyways, yeah, just assembling the cockpit here and putting the pieces in place. One thing that is important to note is that depending on which airplane you're building, there's a label A and a label B. And if you go jumping ahead a little bit here, you have this Pearl Harbor version that's labeled the A, and then you have the Flying Tiger that's labeled the B. So as you go along here, and this is another good reason to go over the instructions first, is you want to make sure that you're putting the right pieces in place. And you know, the seat's a little bit different here with the B version. There's some nuances. So again, you know, it's got a question mark here. If you weren't sure what that meant, you could go back to the first page and, you know, understand what that means if you're newer to the hobby. So I'm going to be following the B on my particular build. So putting the seat together, doing all of that. I use Tamiya extra thin cement to glue the pieces in place, and just kind of going along here. Painted everything interior green. There's some black pieces here, and I just basically painted over the interior green with a flat black. I also black based the cockpit in a black primer as well, because I like when I spray the green on it, the shading effect that you get from the black. But I don't think it's really that necessary, but for me, I like it. The paint seems to stick a little bit better, but I've also seen, especially on some of the smaller, like 172 kits, if you just paint it green, I mean, who's really gonna be able to tell at that scale? You start getting into the 148s, then, you know, I like to do some of those smaller things. There's some decals in here that go into, you know, this part here. Very small decals, and they took some time to do, but I put them in there. So you get this done, and then I sprayed everything with a clear once I had everything painted. I also dry brushed some ghost gray on the sides there to bring out the buttons, and did that whole part. Putting together I guess the cockpit tub, whatever you want to call it. These pieces didn't fit in perfect, but you know, if you kind of hold them in place and you're just, you know, careful with it, I was able to get them in eventually. And yeah, I think it turned out pretty nice. There's also a decal here that you fit on, you know, the pilot gauges, and this is painted black as well. You could also probably dry brush this, the gray, or, you know, aluminum, some type of color, and then do some things with putting in like a clear on the dials and stuff like that. I opted to put in the gears here, so I did that. I chose for this one also to put the pilot in there, and most of my models I leave the pilot out, but this one I wanted to try something a little bit different, and so I decided to do that. The colors here seem to indicate that you paint the pilot like a green for the most part, but when I watched some documentaries on it and looked at some pictures, it seemed like the pilots were wearing kind of a khaki color pants and also like a brown leather jacket. So per my research, I kind of did my own thing with that, and yeah, it was worked out pretty good. I did the black primer on the pilot also to give it that shade, and then I kind of painted lighter to darker where I could. So I did the khakis first, and then I did the leather jacket, boots. The flesh color, that can take a couple of coats, especially with that black primer on there. I'm not much of a figure painter myself, but I was pretty happy with the results. And then I just put a wash on it afterwards, and I thought it turned out pretty good. I'll show you all of this after I get through here. Put in this door. The door fit pretty well. Inside pieces here, and then this part here, you just put the tub into the fuselage in preparation to glue the two halves together. There's some of these parts here you have to paint beforehand putting them in, and I believe these were gunmetal with the interior green, and this one, just make sure that you put it in correctly. Both of these steps here, having the pieces in front of you and kind of lining them up with the way they are on the picture seems to help me out with that, because if you just look at that, it's like, well, where does it go exactly? It might go on this side, but if you just kind of use common sense and you dry fit, you can 95% of the time figure out where it goes. And this AIRFIX kit came together pretty well. It was pretty it's almost, some parts were almost snapped together, or at least when you put them in place they seem to like click to a degree. So also putting in this part in the front here, you have to do putting that in, and then gluing in the fuselage halves. This went together pretty well. I used Tamiya extra thin, and I went really slow, and I put the glue in the seam and then tried to leave a little bit of gap so that a little bit of glue came out, so that way when I sand it I might minimize the seam line a bit more. This part here was a little bit finicky just to get in place. I did my best in putting the fuselage together, so it wasn't too bad, but I had to really kind of push it to get it to get into place. I was able to do it, but I was kind of a little bit leery, thinking that I might snap something off, but I was able to get it in. I'm sure if you took the time to really sand it and get it perfect, so you could do that. But these parts here you have to take off to put on the top cover of the engine, so I just used my X-Acto knife to go ahead and cut those down. So here's just putting in those pieces there, and then putting the top machine guns in there. No big deal. Now we start getting into the different putting together the wings. So you put this part up here, which they seem to fit pretty well. I didn't have too many issues with that part of it. Putting the wheel wells in here. They tell you that they sell an aircraft stand separately. I actually bought some on eBay in a big plastic bag from AIRFIX, but I decided to go with something a little bit different on that. And so you just get the wheels into place. I painted these interior green, just like the inside of the airplane. believe they might be gray on the other one, and I had kind of trouble finding pictures online of what the color was, but I used a green, but I put the wheels in there anyway, so you can't really tell, so I wasn't too concerned about it. So this part here, putting the wings together, I want to say there were fit issues, but where it lines up here with the top half was a little bit, I don't want to say it was hairy, but I had to, you know, bend the pieces into place ever so slightly. I was able to get them in. These pieces right here that go in here didn't seem to fit exactly well, and that could totally be my fault. If I didn't have the wings exactly lined up. They fit in well enough, but there were a couple gaps with it, and it seemed like maybe they weren't perfect. But again, I'm not faulting AIRFIX for that. It could have been me doing it. Like I said, I'm not claiming to be an expert. This is something I do as a hobby in my free time, and I just enjoy doing it, and I like getting challenges at whatever skill level I'm at and trying to solve them, and I'm not always successful, but you know, I do my best. So, you know, got those in place, but I would fill those in with perfect putty later, and I'm happy with the way it turned out. The back wings here, put that in. What's cool here is that if you are planning on doing a diorama or putting it on a stand, you can actually change the rudder and the flaps here, and you know, if you're having it turn or, you know, ascending or descending, you can do some different things with that. I chose to kind of put it in a level flight, so I tried to just keep it the one, but it looks like you can actually manipulate those, and the way that the parts fit in, it did appear that way. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it does indicate here different ranges. So then you get to the cowling down here, and again, question mark, you have two different options. I opted to go with a closed cowl because I have it kind of in level flight, and I'm pretty sure that they're closed when that's going on, and they're open more when they're on the ground or they're cooling it down, or maybe even when they're landing. I think when I built my Corsair, when I was researching it, they said that they would open them sometimes when they're landing, if I remember correctly. So I chose the closed cowl on that part there. So when you get to this part here, you have some options. Well, you have two options to do. You can do it with the landing gear up, or you can do it with the landing gear down, is what these symbols mean here. So I decided to go ahead and do the gear up variant of the model kit, and last couple models I did the wheels. I just kind of wanted to break from that, plus I wanted to try something a little bit different with the way that I was going to display it. So go ahead and you know, have the wheels up for that. And the upside to that is that, you know, there's some steps here that you just don't have to do, and maybe for a beginner it might be a little bit easier to do it that way. Of course, then you have to drill a hole for the stand and all that, but anyways, I'm doing the gear up version of this. So just putting the back wheel cover on here, and then you get to the wheels up, steps 38 and 39, where you're going to put the wheels into the wheel well in the up position. And I wanted to do this separately after I painted everything, so I wanted to paint all of this and keep it off of the airplane until after I painted. So you got like these covers up here, so I wanted to see if I could put these wheels in without, you know, just sliding them in, so that I could paint everything first, and that way I could glue these pieces in here and then put the wheels in after I got done painting and all of that good stuff. And what I found was these were a bit too long to do that, but since I dry fitted it and I knew that it wouldn't work, I went ahead and I cut off the top piece here, and you can actually slide the wheel in once you do that. So that's what I did. I cut it off, and you can't even see this part in there anyway. So that's what I did. So I glued these pieces into place here. I cut the top part and went along. Here's the steps if you decide to put the gear in the down position. Again, more steps. I'm sure that this would have been fine to do. The kit fit together really well in my opinion, so if you do opt to go with this, even though I can't really comment on it because I didn't do that part, I'm sure it would be fine. And this whole page is basically dedicated to putting the landing gear in the down position. So, you know, if you wanted to do this, you would follow these steps, but I didn't. So then we get to the propeller and some of the other smaller items here, machine guns, whatnot. So I basically kept this piece separate from the fuselage, and I built this up on its own. I actually painted the propeller separately without connecting all of this stuff. I connected these two pieces here, but I left all of the rest unattached. And I did a black primer on everything, and yeah, I wanted to just keep it separate to make it a little bit easier and then attach it afterwards. So that's what I did. You want to make sure that this tip here on the left wing is the correct one that you're doing. If you're doing the Flying Tiger, I did the B version. There's also an A version, so make sure you do the B. And then we get to the clear parts here, which I don't want to say that gave me too much trouble, but I had to kind of decide how I was going to do this, because if you look at the painting scheme on the plane here, you can see that, actually right here, that there's a part here that's like this brown flat earth color, and then there's also a part that has the green, and that's on the inside of the glass. So normally I would go ahead and mask everything, put it on, and I could just paint this one color, but because it was like that, I left the glass off so that I could actually paint like that. So a lot of this glass stuff I did at the very end, but I actually started to like mask the different front pieces here, and I ended up, see, the B one I guess would probably be for the Flying Tiger one, and I had it masked and everything, and I couldn't find it when it came time, and as I was moving around in my rolling chair I heard a crack, and that ended up being this part here. So I had to decide whether I wanted to try and fix it, which from what I saw online is really hard to do, if not maybe a lost cause. And the seam was right down the middle, so I couldn't really do too much with it. A version. So that's what I did with that. And just putting this piece into place here, this fits into the front control panel. And again, I left most of this stuff off until the very end. Top piece, I went ahead and just masked that by putting Tamiya masking tape on the top, pressing it down, putting a light overhead, and just cutting on the angles. So that's how I did that part. And you can also do the open part, or you can have the cockpit be open or you can have it closed. I decided to do it the open because I put the figure in there and I did some detail work, and I found a couple pictures of it looked like it was open when they were flying it, so I'm like, well, you know, maybe they had it open, so I went ahead and decided to do that. So that pretty much completes the build. On to the painting part, and I wasn't sure how I was going to tackle this originally, but what I decided to do was I decided to do the flat earth color using a spray paint. I went ahead and I black based everything with a black primer, and I did some shading with the white. I just painted inside the panel lines the white color to give it some pre-shading. And then I painted all of this the white color, and then I did this with airbrush, and I masked the bottom part with sticky tack, and that worked out pretty well. There were a couple spots of overspray, but I was easily able to go ahead and go over that. And with the camouflage pattern, I wasn't sure if I wanted to mask it and try that, or if I wanted to just paint it by hand. I ended up painting it by hand, and this took about, I'd say, 5 or 6 coats to get the camouflage, because there's some parts in the front here where it's kind of curves up and down, and I thought it would be hard to mask, and I just decided that I was going to go ahead and hand paint the camouflage on there. And I just basically did a very light sketch of where the lines were on top of the flat earth brown color, and that worked out pretty well. It does take some time to do that, some patience, but in the end that's what I decided to do. And I actually bought these right here, which worked out really well. I didn't have to mix my own colors for it, and so I recommend this if you don't want to try and figure that out. And what I like about this is you have the different planes here. The one that I'm doing is up here, and you have the different colors labeled here. So I knew light gray, forest green, and brown, and it's pretty cool that they do this. Also, something that's awesome about it is they give you this little handout, and this is going to come in handy on some other builds, I think. So it gives you different colors of some of these different theaters of war and what the planes were. So I'm actually going to be building a Hellcat next, so this might come in pretty handy to figure some of this out. So